My name is Igor Pyrko. I'm from University of Strathclyde. And today I want to talk to you about my PhD project, which I completed last year. As a researcher, I like to see myself as someone who has a huge appreciation for what practitioners do. And most of the ideas that I will discuss today emerged by learning with and from Annette and her team and other practitioners in NHS Scotland. The reason why I originally got interested in this concept was because I believe that organizations still had lots of space for improvement in terms of facilitating how people work together, innovate, share ideas, share knowledge, and so on. And innovation and being innovative are often buzzwords in today's world. But I thought that a community of practice is a mature and established concept with almost a 25-year-old history can be a good way of providing us with a fine-grained language for talking about these topics. So I decided to explore that further, and so there were three reasons why really more specific reasons why I was interested in this concept in that context. So one is that the COP concept entails learning as a formation of a person rather than just acquisition of facts. And I thought that it was a very promising perspective for thinking about learning and knowledge in organizational context, because it means that we really need to work on, engage in such initiatives as you are doing today in terms of trying to develop environments where people can learn in a meaningful way. Also, I thought that this concept is a useful way of thinking about organizations, because as a unit of analysis in terms of social learning, it is the simplest unit of analysis that at the same time has the complexity of all the elements of social learning. So even if I read your brochure from last meeting, you have the knowledge, the domain and practice, for example. So all these different elements of this concept are within that unit of analysis, but still simple enough to talk about many of the challenges that are ahead in terms of helping organizations to be better by learning. As I was getting deeper and deeper in this concept, and as I was working with Annette's team and other practitioners, I thought that there was I had a little bit of a difficulty by talking of these practitioners in terms of deciding, okay, so what is a community of practice? Are we a community of practice? What it takes to develop a community of practice? Is it that we need to instill a community first, give it a name, and then and bring it to life? So I had issues with that. I genuinely had difficulties in terms of scoping the community of practice concept. I wanted to explore that further. And I realized that one inconsistency here could be in terms of how knowledge and knowledge sharing are used in respect to this concept, because communities of practice, where the term was coined in 1991, it was supposed to oppose the back then dominating view of knowledge as something that just experts possess, that you just learn, that something you just gain in schooling at the university. And instead of that, knowledge is something that you learn as an everyday experience of being a person, of everyday experience of life. So learning meaning identity kind of was in opposition to that old picture of knowledge. At the same time, knowledge sharing is used very inconsistently also, probably in particular in the academic literature. So it can entail sharing of documents, emails, facts, whilst in this concept, I guess that the most important type of sharing is the mutual engagement, as we can see in the reading about this concept. So I thought that I need to be a little bit more clear about that. So what I did was I knew that I needed to work on a perspective on knowledge and knowledge sharing that is compatible with the DNA of the concept. And the DNA of COPs is a learning which entails investment of identity in a social context. So the perspective on knowledge which I wanted to bring back into COPs was the notion of knowledge as being personal. So knowledge is part of who you are, that as we develop our knowledge, as we engage with other people in our practices, we develop our knowledge, and we are becoming constantly. So this view of knowledge as part of you are, and here the tacitness of knowledge underpins all our acts, so all our acts of knowing. What we do is underpinned by a large sphere of things that we cannot say, but we just seem to know it as we do things in our practices. And knowledge sharing in such sense means that when we share knowledge, we focus on this, we attend to the same cues, to the same point of focus, to the same problems, and as we in real time, as we genuinely care about these problems and we try to solve them together, we discover what the other person, how that other person deals with the problems, how they approach these problems. So we're not just taking that knowledge and in a sense of sharing that we take their knowledge and we put it in our heads and we share it and we give our knowledge to them. But by discovering how those people understand these problems in practice, we redevelop our own knowledge, and this tacitness is developed rather than acquired. So so in my PhD, I call this process as a process of thinking together, just as a simple point of focus for thinking about knowledge sharing in COPs. And for my empirical research, I did interviews across Scotland with, in the areas of sepsis and dementia, and I also spoke with a number of practitioners dealing with education, management, development, leadership. And there are many interesting stories. In the dementia area, for example, a number of leaders wanted to develop a forum for different professionals in the area of dementia, so that people, for example, in Shetlands and islands and highlands could preventing the wheels, so they can have some shared space for discussions, basically so that they're not isolated. And the idea was to set up a discussion forum online. However, so as part of the discussion forum, they were publishing a newsletter where they were including different people's stories of how they engage in practice, and that worked very well for these practitioners. So it met many of their initial goals in terms of working on a kind of shared sense of identification for the practitioners in different parts of Scotland. However, because the kind of sharing that they engaged with was via the administrators of the site. So they would be, for example, sending these stories directly to the administrators. They didn't have enough mutual engagement to sustain a shared practice, as a practice in a sense that's turning as a history of learning. And therefore, they didn't have enough engagement along the way. But for what they were trying to achieve, that was in many ways sufficient, a newsletter with these stories. And I will later get back to what we learned from this. In the sepsis area, I did interviews with the collaboratives, so basically sepsis practitioners meeting together in the national conferences via WebEx, as Annette mentioned. And I talked, for example, with a junior nurse and also with an experienced nurse consultant. And even though they had different goals, but with respect to these events, they were able to gain something very valuable from that. So the experienced nurse was able to find people who had some very narrow interests within that broader community. For example, the young nurse said that the main goal for her was to feel more confident as a practitioner, and that was achieved. Now, another interesting example in the sepsis area was that I visited a hospital called Borders General Hospital in the south of Scotland. And there, the hospital has done very well in the recent years in terms of increasing patient safety in the context of sepsis. So, for example, the number of cardiac arrests dropped within the last 10 years from 400. I can't remember the numbers precisely, but it's about from 400 something to 30 in 10 years. So they kind of regressed with respect to sepsis. So I wanted to see what was it that they were doing so well. And what happened there is that before that, sepsis was treated within the intensive care department. And in my interview, we said that it was almost like an inner sanctum, where the patients would be taken in a very bad state, and then they would leave healthy. And then, but people, so fine, and people in the wards, the practitioners in the wards, didn't really know what was happening there. Now, the leader of that, there was a team called the outreach team set up in order to respond to a need of helping practitioners to identify and diagnose and treat sepsis early. So the outreach team realized that the sepsis needed to be something that needs to be treated by everyone in the hospital, and not just the intensive care, because everyone, patients can get sick. It's very little time to respond, and so even if they have an awareness of these basic concepts and how to do things, they can see, oh, that patient doesn't seem to be well, he might have sepsis. Let's ask someone who's an expert on this. And that led to improvement. They were mentoring junior doctors and junior nurses. They were delivering interdisciplinary courses which are fully voluntary. They were allowing these junior practitioners to engage with the outreach team. So the outreach team were all specialists, nurses in the area of sepsis. They were, for example, they implement a number of systems for communicating and diagnosing sepsis, like sepsis 6 and so forth. And that led to a shared practice of what it means to treat sepsis within hospital, with the core group almost within that sepsis outreach team, and people from other wards as almost like peripheral practitioners who this way were able to diagnose sepsis. So these were just some of the stories that we witnessed by engaging with practitioners. And I wanted to briefly, because we have probably, don't know how much time we have, could you remind us how much time? Probably, I'll try to be quick. A number of just learning points that I wanted to share with you. Based on these studies, I thought that the role of thinking together can be seen as very important. And thinking together is understood as knowledge sharing. So, for example, what was missing in that dementia example, even though they reached many of their goals, that thinking together was not the case. So in a way, again, thinking together in terms of really genuinely engaging with the same problems and discovering what's on the other person's mind, and therefore this way developing very deep knowledge for yourself. That means that the core group of a community of practice is not just the people who have interests or a stake in a community. So, for example, there were managers who had lots of people who wanted to help, and they had an idea for a COP, but there wasn't enough people who were actually going to think together regularly about these ideas, and that didn't lead to anywhere, even though the intentions were good and the resources were out there. So the core group of a community is in a way defined by thinking together, and these structural elements, the community, domain, and practice, as for example you have in your brochure again, are always changing because of it. It provides a process perspective on COPs. Going from there to the idea of developing COPs, I think that one thing to have in mind is that because it requires, the thinking together is more demanding in time, effort, trust, commitment. It can be seen as an expensive endeavor, and it doesn't mean to be necessarily in money, but in time and again in commitment. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not just like a company meeting just to everyone just can meet, but it's about really focusing on something that we all care about. And also doesn't necessarily impose a particular format. So it can be discussion groups, but it can be actually a team which has many of these elements anyway. It doesn't even, you don't even have to call them community of practice. It is in many ways, it is a tool for us to think, to reflect, or for facilitators to support such groups. It also, when I had a lunch with Etienne one time, I was telling him the story of the sepsis outreach team. And I was telling him that the legitimization seemed to be very important because we had a medical director who believed in the outreach team from the very beginning. We had the patient safety collaborator and the collaboratives who were also providing them experts from different parts of NHS Scotland. And at the community level, there was an excellent leader who was like a very friendly, very great teacher, very inspirational, non-judgmental, and he was providing legitimization. It was okay to spend time on learning what it means to diagnose sepsis. And the medical director from the very start was saying that it's fine if you spend time at work on learning that, because that gave vision, and if you gave people vision, that pays off. And also the resources need to match the scale. You can have small initiatives, but then you need to think how much resources you have. If you have a bigger vision, then also you might need to think that will require some more resources. So just to be quick at the end, that also, what it means for us in terms of the scope of COPs. It means, for me, it seems that the scope of COPs is that we take a holistic view on knowledge sharing, so the holistic view of thinking together. So people who are thinking together, people who have some meaningful, at least access to that thinking together, so they can not necessarily engage with in that, but at least they understand more or less what's happening in there. And the importance of community. So it's not only about practice, it's about emotion, about trust, and that can't be trivialized. It's very important. So this vision is important in building relationships around that. And as the collaboratives, as the sepsis case, and also the dementia case teaches us that this can lead to a trans-organizational knowledge in a sense that is from place to place. The knowledge is a sticky and leaky, sticks to certain practices, leaks to practices of other people who care. Because practices don't scale beyond people who care. And this way, like in the collaboratives example, those people from different parts of the organization were able to develop this kind of engagement across the organizational boundaries. So thank you, that's in terms of me.